Hello and welcome to Forever F1, an absolute carnage at Alpine today. Two massive announcements amidst a very poor start for the side that finished sixth in the Constructors' Championship last year, and it was a massive achievement, I think, to finish sixth. You know, that whole sort of the idea of the race of being the best sort of mid-grid team, and Alpine were very much that last year, and we sort of felt that maybe that was going to be them taking the next step to being competitive. However, we have seen them backtrack a lot, and unfortunately for them, it's not worked out. And then you got, for example, the performance of Willams, who we were expecting to be really competitive from 2026, looking really, really good and picking up points consistently. And right now, they are very much setting the standards for. In fact, actually better than Aston Martin. So they're actually sort of putting themselves on a top 5 team again, which is really, really cool to see. But there's been some big movements today in Alpine. It'll be interesting to see how this is all going to play out. And it very much has Flavio Briatore written all over it, and in terms of the team principal leaving as well as a driver replacement. So let's get into it, shall we? So the announcement first of all came that team principal Oliver Oakes has resigned, allegedly. That was the statement that came out from Alpine, and they said that Flavio Briatore will continue as executive advisor and covering the duties. And basically, it sounds like there's been a massive power struggle within Alpine. Lots of talk about a driver change. Jack Doohan struggling so far in his early sort of stages of his F1 career. And I think a lot of resistance towards, who's going to make the call. And whenever you have a personality like a Flavio Briatore within your setup as an advisor, in inverted commas, you're always going to feel very threatened as Oliver Oakes, who's the team principal, because Briatore just knows no limits. He doesn't really know where the line begins and ends with regards to what he can and should be doing. And unfortunately, I think that was always going to be a bit of a recipe for disaster. So in effect, Flavio Briatore has become the team principal. Now he is running the show at Alpine. Now, Alpine, Pierre Gasly's been doing what he can with a poor car, but he's been consistently outperforming Jack Doohan by quite a lot. And I think that's kind of been the big issue. It's not a case of the two drivers been quite similar, but they've both been quite slow and both not sort of really competing. Then you can kind of sit there and say, well, it's really a car issue. The car's not fast enough. They don't have the kind of the ability to compete with the higher teams. But Gasly's showing signs every now and again that the car can sort of compete. I don't think it's anyway as fast as the Williams, for example. And Gasly's having to really sort of pull out a couple of big performances to try and get them into any sort of position to score points, and Jack Doohan at the moment just can't, and he has had a few crashes. I do feel sorry for him because I think this last weekend it wasn't his fault, but unfortunately they've made the call and he has been officially replaced by Franco Colapinto for the next 5 races. Now that itself is interesting, and I think there's quite a lot to break down here. When Jack Doohan joined and got given the seat, they also signed Franco Colapinto to Alpine. And they had a very interesting lineup with Pierre Gasly being obviously sort of your senior driver, former Red Bull driver, but not and a Grand Prix winner, but not somebody who's maybe one of the top 10 or I mean I think he probably is actually in the top 10 best drivers in the grid, but not you can actually have a discussion whether he is or not. Then you've got Jack Doohan, who's a rookie, and then you're going to throw in Franco Colapinto, who had a very interesting start to his F1 career last year. We had half a season with Williams where he did score points and had a good start, but also then was very crash. They had a big crash tendency, to be honest. He did have quite a few crashes. And all of a sudden, you've got a lineup where you're considering going, well, is Jack Doohan better than Colapinto? Is there much between them, for example? And that is always going to cause a problem because Jack Doohan is never going to feel like he's being fully backed when you've got something like Colapinto as the reserve driver. You look at Ferrari, for example, and they've got a Formula 1 driver in Jacques Villeneuve as their Formula 1 driver. But, I mean, it's not like Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc are ever going to feel under threat from the reserve driver. Very few teams have a reserve driver who is similar to or on pace with, the main driver. And I do think that's played a lot in that Jack Doohan has started his entire F1 career with a monkey on his back and with a lot of pressure that basically if he doesn't perform quickly, he will be replaced because there is a very apt and ready driver with more experience than him, yes, albeit half a season, but in a very similar sort of position with similar sort of credentials who's ready to take over. And, I just don't think you can perform well like that. I think it's a bit like Liam Lawson's situation where you're sitting there going out every time knowing that one small mistake and you're gone. And it's not a comfortable environment that, for me, will bring out the best in drivers and be able to be conducive to achieving results. So I feel for Jack Doohan because I think he's a talented driver. I don't think he's been good enough. I think that is this harsh? I do think it is a bit harsh. I think they could give him longer. but he's not given them much reason to stick with him. And at the end of the day, we've seen how cutthroat the business is, but also we're seeing how Red Bull, tossed out Liam Lawson, Yuki Tsunoda's come in. It's not like Yuki Tsunoda's thrived. So maybe it's a similar thing. I don't think Colapinto's going to suddenly start, getting points week in, week out, unless there's improvements to the car itself. So in terms of the reaction, Jack Doohan said, I'll keep my head down, keep working hard. What's interesting is the fact that it's not a permanent thing. So they basically said for the next 5 races, Colapinto's going to have a go. So we've basically had, we've had 6 races so far. We're now going to have another 5 races, and then they're going to make a call. And basically, Colapinto just has to do better than Jack Doohan. Probably actually just has to be on par, really, to basically say, well, he's not been worse, so it doesn't really worry making much change. If he goes and does much better, then it becomes very easy to make that switch. And, I think that's where things will start to get quite interesting. But, the big thing in terms of that is that Ralf Schumacher talks about the fact that he just made far too many mistakes. And when we did see Arakawa go into the car in the first session, he was a lot better. So unfortunately, not a lot you could do as Jack Doohan to justify why you should stay on. And unfortunately, that's why they've made the call. Is it the right call, though? What do you think? Let me know down in the comments below. Smash a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Steve. I'll chat to you soon.